This is the story of a building and of the famous and not so famous people who've walked through these doors, sat in this auditorium, and spoken from this platform. October 23rd, 1910. Over 1,000 prominent politicians, theologians, educators, financiers, and businessmen came to 2 West 64th Street in New York City. They came for the dedication of the meeting house of the Society for Ethical Culture. During the following 100 years, the meeting house would provide a safe space for people in need, a community resource for the discussion and sharing of ideas, and an incubator for social justice. Here, programs were created that not only benefited the people of this city, but had far-reaching effects around the country and the world. Founded by Dr. Felix Adler 34 years earlier, the ethical culture movement had grown and matured. After meeting at Carnegie Hall for nearly 20 years, now the society had a home of its own. As Felix Adler said that day,
"The new building is a new opportunity. That is all. It will mean much or nothing, according as we use it. May it fulfill the hopes which those who are here attach to it."
Many people spoke. They commemorated what had already been accomplished in the short history of the society, planting the seeds for the Visiting Nurse Association, the National Child Labor Committee, the Trade School for Girls, and the NAACP. Felix Adler knew that education is critical to bringing people out of poverty. This drove the founding of the first free kindergarten east of the Mississippi in 1877, and the Working Man's School in 1880. That school became the Ethical Culture School. Dedicated in 1904, the school would share physical and educational resources with the soon-to-follow meeting house. John Lovejoy Elliott shared Felix Adler's grasp of the value of education. A 19th century community organizer and ethical culture leader, Elliott moved into Hell's Kitchen to work closely with the poor and disadvantaged who lived there. He founded the Hudson Guild Settlement House in Chelsea, a refuge and resource for people to improve their lives. 1912 was a time when immigrants had few jobs and fewer training opportunities. Elliott founded the Cooperative Printing School of Apprentices, later a part of the city school system. His concern with employment opportunities for young people continued throughout his life. As he said nearly 30 years later,
"Of course, I recognize that the situation of the unemployed youth is different in America today. The percentage of unemployment is between those people, between 16 and 18 years of age. It rests on the shoulders of those who neither physically nor from the standpoint of experience are able to bear it."
As the U.S. was entering World War I, Elliott joined Norman Thomas and other judicial activists, forming the Civil Liberties Bureau to protect the rights of conscientious objectors and fight for freedom of speech. This laid the foundation for the American Civil Liberties Union. During the war, the meeting house was again a safe space, now for war refugee relief efforts and entertaining servicemen on leave. The mission of the War Camp Community Service would be taken up by the USO during the next Great War. As the war to end all wars ended, Americans turned inward. The promise of a chicken in every pot was not fulfilled, but as an economist from a later generation might say, it was nevertheless a time of irrational exuberance. Many were left out of that prosperity. In response, Elliott established the Hudson Guild Farm in 1921. That made it possible for even the poorest families to enjoy a week camping in the country. With the opening of the Fieldston School in Riverdale in 1928, the Ethical Culture School now had a K-12 educational program. Society leaders chaired the unique Fieldston School Ethics Department, which included a community service component. But the all-too-short decade of prosperity came to a screeching halt with the stock market crash of 1929. Over the next 10 years, the meeting house was challenged to cope with the crisis. One of the most important programs of that era was creation of the United Social Service Society in 1936. This served as a conduit to distribute funding to a wide variety of social outreach programs. In the 1930s, photography was witness to the Depression. The Ethical Culture School developed a socially responsible photographic program. Just as Louis Hine had done for child labor issues early in the century, Paul Strand and Doris Ullman not only taught photography, but were sent out into the community to document social issues. Algernon Black joined the Society's staff in 1923 and was appointed a leader in 1932. He was a driving force behind many of the social justice programs developed in the Meeting House over the next several decades. In the late 1930s, the Nazi march across Europe drove people from their homes and livelihoods. Seeing the futility of trying to survive there, many sought refuge in the shadow of the Statue of Liberty, as had so many before them. In response, in 1938, the Meeting House became the site of the Good Neighbor Committee, a cooperative program helping European refugees adapt to life in this country. This became a national program under the Works Project Administration, with the support of Eleanor Roosevelt. Thus began her long association with the Meeting House. As it had during World War I, once again, the Meeting House opened its doors to servicemen and women, a safe space where they could enjoy a brief respite from the battlefields of yet another devastating war, without discrimination as to race, color, or nationality. Continuing its role as a center for public discourse, the Meeting House was the scene of the Conferences on Science and Democracy from 1943 to 45. Leader Jerome Nathanson was chairman, and John Dewey was honorary president. These often lively debates typically drew over 500 people. As Nathanson stated, the principle of these debates was that
modern society must be pluralistic. Without the principle of pluralism, no decent democratic society can exist.
after the devastation of World War II, Algernon Black felt the need for a program to assure that fascism could not take hold in this country. Enlisting the support of Eleanor Roosevelt, he, Henry Herman, and Alice Politzer created the Encampment for Citizenship to foster political awareness among young people. The first group of 128 campers gathered on the campus of the Fieldston School in June 1946. Mrs. Roosevelt often invited the campers to cookouts at Hyde Park. The encampment continued for the next 45 years in various locations throughout the country and Puerto Rico. Eleanor Roosevelt summed up the accomplishments of the decade in a speech at the Meeting House in 1946.
I think you have probably contributed more than any other group in the city to better conditions in homes, better conditions between the various race groups within the city, and I think that is a very great achievement.
Ethical culture has long been committed to racial equality and civil rights. Since helping to found the NAACP in 1909, society leaders continued to serve on its board. In 1956, the National Committee Against Discrimination in Housing was established in the Meeting House. Even before women were accepted as society members in the 1920s, the Women's Conference was fighting for women's rights. In 1959, the conference founded the first Planned Parenthood clinic on Manhattan's Upper West Side. In the 1960s, a drive led by Harry Belafonte and Algernon Black increased job opportunities for blacks in television commercials. In 1965, the New York Committee to Abolish Capital Punishment, headquartered in the Meeting House, achieved its goal. And throughout the turbulent 60s, there were the rallies, the protests, and the sorrow. In 1964, the Meeting House was the site of the memorial service for Andrew Goodman, one of the 3 civil rights workers slain in Mississippi. His mother would be memorialized in this same auditorium. April 6, 1969, over 1,500 people came to the Meeting House for a jazz requiem to commemorate the first anniversary of the death of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. In 1970, the Society created the Ethical Humanist Award to honor individuals who act with extraordinary moral courage, without regard for the sanction or acclaim of his or her peers or of society, and whose actions have had broad humanizing implications. Since then, the Ethical Humanist Award has been given just 18 times. Among the recipients were former Governor Cuomo, Senators Jeffords, Feingold, and Wellstone, and Dorothy Day. In 1971, the United Social Service Society was reconstituted as the Social Service Board. The board immediately set out on an active program of community service projects for senior citizens and immigrants, fulfilling a primary charitable mission of ethical culture. In 1983, the board opened one of the first faith-based shelters for homeless women. This shelter continues providing a safe space for this needy population. In 1998, the board initiated a supervised visitation program to allow children to have safe and secure interaction with their non-custodial parents. Clients are asked to pay what they can afford and receive support for as long as needed. Leader Corin Arizian reignited the public discourse mission of the Meeting House with the advocacy forums. Like the programs before them, these free public events often fill the Meeting House to overflowing. The Public Issues Committee converted advocacy into action, initiating protest rallies and letter-writing campaigns on such issues as paid family leave, military bases in Iraq, stem cell research, and child health insurance. Quality of life and personal interaction are no less important human values. Throughout its history, the Meeting House has served as a cultural center for the community. A wide variety of public concerts, panel discussions, film showings, workshops, seminars, and play readings take place here. But as Algernon Black laid down the continuing challenge in 1976,
there's no end to the work to be done for each generation, and we're far from perfecting and fulfilling what we mean by a vision of a better life.
So as it begins its second century, the Meeting House is rededicated to confronting the compelling issues of our time: justice for juvenile offenders, unemployment, immigration reform, sustaining the environment, human slavery, and religious, ethnic, and gender discrimination. Future speakers from this platform will join with the voices from the past. They too will be calling for social justice, equality, human rights, and most importantly, universal standards of ethics and morality.